My laptop screen had been glowing for 14 consecutive hours. The cursor blinked in the metadata field, while I scrolled through thumbnails that shouldn't exist, images that were supposed to stay buried in my camera's memory card in perpetuity. Judge Caldwell stood beside a man I didn't recognize at the corner of Ashland and 18th. Their body language screamed negotiation. Their proximity suggested something far darker, more dangerous than a simple conversation. The photograph was sharp, professional. Everything I'd been trained to capture and everything I should have deleted the moment I realized what I'd documented. I'd been investigating the judge's death for 3 weeks now, though officially it had been ruled a suicide. Anyone who'd known Caldwell understood that conclusion was fabricated. He'd been too paranoid, too invested in his own survival to take his own life. My studio apartment in Pilsen doubled as everything. Bedroom, office, makeshift kitchen, and temporary home. I'd converted the corner near the window into a darkroom setup years ago, though the equipment had gathered dust since I'd migrated to digital editing. The radiator clanked intermittently against the far wall, a sound so rhythmic by now that I barely registered it anymore. Outside my window, the neighborhood was surrendering to the kind of quiet that only early mornings possessed. Sunday was creeping toward Pilsen, and the Lower West Side slept like it was recovering from exhaustion. The coffee in my cup had gone cold an hour ago. I drank it anyway, not bothering to stand and make fresh. The other photographs were worse than the first. The man beside Caldwell wasn't simply anyone. My research had uncovered federal connections, organized crime ties that stretched across multiple jurisdictions like a spiderweb of corruption. I'd been meticulous. I'd cross-referenced sources, verified information through secondary channels, built a narrative that couldn't be dismissed as paranoia or conspiracy theory. Someone had killed the judge and made it look like suicide. These photographs proved it. My phone buzzed on the desk. Derek again. My colleague had been messaging all week with warnings I couldn't decipher properly. Something about sources asking questions. About someone hunting for a photographer who'd been working the neighborhood. I'd dismissed his paranoia as professional competition initially, jealousy disguised as concern. Now, staring at my screen, watching those images load one after another, I wondered if I'd made a catastrophic mistake in ignoring him. The coffee cup shattered against the floor when hands grabbed me from behind. I screamed, pure, uncontrolled reflex. But pressure on my mouth killed the sound before it could fully form. The grip was professional, controlled. Not a robbery, not an assault in the conventional sense. This was calculated, precise. "Do not scream again," a voice said against my ear. Accented. Italian, perhaps, or something Eastern European I couldn't place accurately. "Do not make noise. Do not resist." My eyes adjusted enough to see his reflection in the window, a large silhouette, a frame that suggested years of violence or discipline or both. I couldn't discern his face clearly in the low light, only impressions, dangerous impressions. "The photographs," he continued, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. "You have seen them. You will not tell anyone about them." My heart hammered against my ribs so forcefully I thought bone might crack. How did he know about the photographs? How was he in my apartment? The security door downstairs hadn't functioned since October, but people found ways inside. The technician flashed the controller twice before the hammer work started, so even a clean room would only retrieve silence. He spun me around. Now I could see him properly under the apartment's limited lighting. Dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything about me simultaneously. A strong jaw with a thin scar running along the mandible like someone had sliced him open and forgotten to let him bleed out. He was maybe 35, dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly rent combined, though I forced myself not to calculate prices. Black hair swept back from his forehead. Olive skin. Handsome in the way predators are handsome. Beautiful wrapped around danger. Designed to make you hesitate just long enough. "Who are you?" My voice emerged smaller than I expected. Fragile. Someone keeping you alive. He moved toward my laptop, glanced at the screen displaying Judge Caldwell and his mysterious companion. His expression remained impassive, but something hardened behind his eyes. Something that suggested violence was a language he spoke fluently. "The Yakuza knows you have these. They're coming for you. 20 minutes, perhaps less. That's impossible. How would they even get dressed?" Now. He didn't raise his voice. That made it worse than shouting would have been. Pack nothing. Bring nothing. Just yourself and whatever you're wearing. Move. I grabbed my red jacket from the chair beside my bed. My hands shook so badly I could barely find the armholes. My mind spiraled through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. This wasn't random violence. He knew about the photographs. He knew about Yakuza involvement. The questions Derek had been asking suddenly crystallized into horrifying clarity. "Why should I trust you?" I demanded, pulling on black sneakers without bothering with socks. "Because the alternative is remaining here when they arrive. They will not be polite. They will not negotiate." He was already moving toward the door, checking the hallway through the peephole with professional efficiency. "And because I have been watching long enough to know you are too intelligent for suicide." 3 men appeared in my apartment then. I hadn't even heard them enter. They moved like they belonged here, assessing corners and windows with the efficiency of soldiers trained to identify threats and neutralize them. One of them nodded to the man who'd grabbed me. "Service stairs," he instructed them in a language I didn't understand. Then back to me, his tone brooking no argument. "Move." The hallway was empty. We descended through the back stairwell, the kind nobody used because everyone preferred the elevator despite its unreliability. My breath came in short gasps. My laptop contained everything. My files, my research, the accumulated work of 3 weeks of investigation. I was leaving it all behind. "The photographs," I said as we reached the ground level, my voice cracking. "My work. Already secured." He said it like I should have known this already. Like he'd been planning my extraction for weeks, maybe longer. "You do not touch them. You do not know where they are. This keeps you alive." The back alley opened onto 19th Street. A black car waited with its engine running, windows so darkly tinted I couldn't see inside. He pushed me toward the back door. I resisted on instinct, but his hand was already there, guiding me not unkindly but with absolute authority that didn't allow for negotiation. "Get in." The interior smelled like expensive leather and cologne, the kind that probably had an Italian name I couldn't pronounce. Another man sat in the driver's seat. He didn't acknowledge me, just pulled into traffic the moment my captor closed the door behind us. The streets of Chicago slid past the window, in a blur of neon signs and closed storefronts. I watched the neighborhoods change. Pilsen's colorful murals and cultural landmarks gave way to industrial areas, then highways, then stretches of darkness where the city eventually surrendered to the natural landscape. At some point, I realized I was crying. Silent tears down my cheeks that I didn't bother wiping away because what did it matter anymore? "What's your name?" I asked the man beside me. He was staring out the window, his profile sharp and defined against the passing streetlights. A predator at rest. Nicholas Verziani. The name meant nothing to me then. It would mean everything soon enough. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere secure, for now." The drive stretched into hours. My captor, Nicholas, didn't speak again. He answered his phone once, speaking in rapid Italian to someone on the other end. The only English words I caught were "secure" and "media" before he switched back to his native language. My hands clenched in my lap. Everything I understood about my life had inverted in less than 30 minutes. Dawn was breaking over Michigan when we turned onto a private road. The property appeared suddenly through dense trees. A modernist house with glass walls and clean lines. Nothing like I'd expected a criminal to own. Nothing about this made sense. Everything about it terrified me completely. He helped me out of the car like we were arriving at a date, his hand at the small of my back. Cameras tracked our movement with methodical precision. Security was visible but not aggressive. Men nodded as we passed, acknowledging their boss and his unusual cargo. "This is where you stay," Nicholas said, gesturing inside, "until this resolves. And if I refuse?" He looked at me with those dark eyes, and I understood without needing words that refusing wasn't really an option. The door had closed behind me the moment I climbed into that car. I was inside now. Inside his world. Inside his cage. The morning light found me in a room I didn't recognize, surrounded by unfamiliar furniture that belonged to someone else's carefully curated life. I woke to the sound of movement beyond the door. My body rigid on sheets that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something floral I couldn't identify. The bedroom was larger than my entire apartment back in Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a lake I didn't remember seeing during the drive, though it must have arrived at some point during the hours I'd been too terrified to register my surroundings properly. A woman entered without knocking. She was in her 60s, with salt and pepper hair pulled into a neat bun, and an expression that suggested she'd seen far stranger things than a kidnapped photographer in her employer's guest room. She carried a tray with coffee, fresh bread, butter, and jam arranged like an apology. He'd had the cameras in the guest wing disabled after midnight, he added. An experiment in trust. Buongiorno, she said, setting the tray on the mahogany side table. Her accent was thick, authentically Italian. Sophia, I take care of the house. Mr. Versiani wants you in the library at 10. You have 2 hours. What did Caldwell fear? Nicholas asked. Not as an attack. More like a man testing a fence. Obsolescence, I said. And whoever taught him that leverage is just the habit the powerful wear to sleep. Nicholas turned a page that he wasn't reading. You don't like judges. I don't like choreography. I set the book down. Caldwell's calendar had a pattern. Lunches at places that don't serve lunch. Notes that aren't notes. 2-letter initials that aren't initials. He met Tanaka twice in places that were loud and sweet. Bakery kitchens, delivery bays. He picked the rooms where sugar hid microphones. He was careful. Careful gets you predictable. Predictable gets you dead. Nicholas watched me the way the very alert watch the bite marks on a story. And you took pictures of the wrong meeting. The right one, I corrected. At the wrong time. He weighed that for a beat and nodded like a chess player conceding a graceful loss. We're both here because of timing. It was the first truth we shared that felt like mercy. She left before I could form a response. I sat there staring at the coffee, wondering if it was drugged, if anything in this house could be trusted. Then hunger won over paranoia, and I drank it anyway. It tasted like genuine espresso, the kind that cost money I didn't have. The library was exactly what I'd glimpsed when Nicholas first brought me inside. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, natural light flooding through windows that framed the Michigan landscape like paintings. But now I could see the collection properly. First editions, books in Italian, Portuguese, English, a leather wingback chair positioned near the fireplace. Everything spoke of someone who read, who thought, who wasn't supposed to be a criminal. Nicholas was there with 2 other men when I arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. The one I recognized from my apartment was called Franco. He'd been mentioned only in passing during the ride, but he had the diplomat's face of someone trained to negotiate. The other man, Marco, looked like someone's nightmare. Scarred knuckles, eyes that had seen violence rendered into routine. Olivia, Nicholas said, gesturing to a leather sofa across from where he sat. You slept well? I hope. I didn't sit. I was kidnapped. I slept like kidnapped victims sleep. Fair assessment. He didn't seem offended. Let me explain what happened. What followed was a clinical breakdown of my own investigation turned against me. Weeks ago, his people, informants scattered across Chicago in positions I couldn't have guessed, had flagged my movements. A photographer asking questions about Judge Caldwell. A woman accessing certain public records. Interviewing specific people. Building a narrative that Nicholas described with the precision of someone who'd already reviewed it. The Yakuza discovered you before we did, he explained, leaning back in his chair like this was a business meeting rather than the dismantling of my life. They understood immediately what those photographs represented. One image of Kenji Tanaka meeting with a federal informant would destroy operations they've spent decades constructing. The second you captured that meeting, you became a liability to multiple organizations. How did you know about the photographs? I demanded. I never published anything. I didn't even tell Derek. I stopped, realizing I'd revealed my investigation partner's name. Your colleague, Derek Mitchell, has been asking dangerous questions about a photographer in your neighborhood for 3 weeks, Franco interjected smoothly. He created visibility. Visibility attracts attention from people who cannot afford witnesses. Nicholas continued, his voice steady as though discussing weather. I monitored the situation because the photographs implicated me. Not as an informant. I'm too invested in remaining invisible to work with federal agencies. But my people were conducting business in that area. If your images contained evidence of my operations alongside evidence of federal cooperation, Then suddenly the FBI has leverage I cannot allow them to possess. So you kidnapped me to protect yourself, I said, the reality of it landing like a physical blow. I kidnapped you to keep you alive. There was something in his tone that suggested he believed this distinction mattered. You were 3 hours away from Yakuza operatives deciding what to do with a witness. They were coming with questions and no intention of leaving you breathing. I arrived first. He pulled a laptop from beneath the coffee table and opened it. News from Chicago filled the screen. Local headline, "Photographer missing in connection with judge investigation." My photograph stared back at me from my own investigation files, a professional headshot I'd used for freelance work. FBI statement requesting information regarding my whereabouts. "They're looking for you," Nicholas said. "Federal Bureau of Investigation considers you a potential witness to corruption. Yakuza considers you a liability that needs permanent removal. Both organizations would love to find you. The difference is their intentions. So I'm what? Leverage for you? Insurance? You're a woman who saw things she shouldn't have and survived long enough to need protection from people more dangerous than I am." He closed the laptop. "Your mother lives in Meadowbrook Assisted Living in Chicago. She's registered under her legal name, Nancy Foster. She has moderate Alzheimer's and requires 24-hour care. That care costs approximately $7,000 per month." The shift in conversation was so abrupt, I felt momentarily disoriented. "How do you know about my mother? I know everything relevant about you. Your mother will be kept safe. Her facility will continue receiving full payment. No one will approach her, threaten her, or use her as leverage against you. This is my guarantee. And if I don't cooperate, then we're back to the original problem. You have 2 organizations hunting you. I'm offering a third option. Cooperation in exchange for safety. For you and for Nancy." Franco spoke up then. "Your colleague Derek has also received protection. Subtle, but comprehensive. We've discouraged certain organizations from making contact with him. He's been told very clearly that information regarding your location or condition dies with anyone foolish enough to capture him." I realized what they were saying. Derek was being protected, yes, but as leverage. If I tried to contact him, if I tried to leave, anyone desperate enough could use him to force compliance. "The photographs," I said quietly. "What happens to them?" "They remain secure until the situation resolves," Nicholas replied. "You don't know where they are. This is intentional. The Yakuza cannot torture information from you that you genuinely don't possess. The FBI cannot subpoena evidence they cannot locate. The photographs become insurance for all parties, including you." I sat down then, feeling the reality of my new existence settle across my shoulders like weight. "For how long?" "Until Yakuza stops hunting you," Nicholas said. "Until the FBI loses interest in pursuing a missing person with no remaining leads. Until I'm confident you can exist in the world without attracting lethal attention." Weeks? Months? Potentially. He wasn't offering false hope, which was somehow worse than if he'd lied. "You'll have freedom within this property. The grounds are secure but extensive. There's a library, a pool, gardens. You can make phone calls to your mother, though they'll be monitored. You cannot leave without escort. You cannot contact authorities. You cannot attempt communication with your former colleagues. And if I refuse, then I'll arrange your departure and hope that the 3 weeks it takes for Yakuza to locate you are peaceful ones. But we both know they will find you eventually." The weight of the trap was absolute. Nicholas wasn't threatening me. He was simply presenting mathematics. Stay here, or die on a timeline I couldn't control. Neither option was freedom. Both options were just variations of confinement. "I want guarantees," I heard myself say. "Written. About my mother's care. About what happens to me." For the first time, something that might have been respect flickered across Nicholas's face. "You'll have them. Franco will prepare documents. But understand, Olivia, my word is better than any paper. Paper can be found, used against you. My word is business, and business is how I survive." He stood, indicating the meeting was finished. Marco and Franco followed him toward the door, leaving me alone in the library with my coffee gone cold and my entire understanding of safety permanently altered. The books around me suddenly felt like props in someone else's story. I was merely an actor now, following a script I'd never auditioned for. That first night alone in the guest room, I called my mother. The phone was monitored. I could hear the faint click of recording equipment. But she answered, confused and cheerful. I told her I was on a work retreat. She didn't question it. She never questioned anything anymore. When I hung up, I sat in the darkness of my borrowed room and acknowledged the truth. I was exactly where Nicholas had calculated I would eventually agree to be. Not kidnapped anymore. Imprisoned by mathematics and care, and the simple, terrible fact that staying alive meant staying here, in his world, under his watch, until he decided the threat had passed, if it ever passed at all. The pool became my sanctuary by the third day. It was an indoor facility with glass walls overlooking the lake, heated to a temperature that made me forget about the security cameras I could see mounted in the corners. Sophia had provided me with a swimsuit, black, simple, expensive, that appeared in my room with the precision of hotel service. Everything here operated with that kind of invisible efficiency. Meals materialized, clothes were cleaned and returned. The world functioned around my confinement like I was a guest rather than a prisoner. On the afternoon of day 4, Franco found me there. He didn't emerge from the changing room in swim trunks. He simply stood at poolside in his dress shirt and slacks, watching me with the careful attention of someone assessing a potential threat. "You're not attempting escape," he observed, settling into one of the lounge chairs nearby. I pulled myself from the water, reaching for the towel he'd probably ensured would be available. Where would I go? This property is surrounded by forest and security. I'd be dead before reaching the main road. Exactly. Franco smiled, and it was almost genuine, which means either you're intelligent or defeated. I'm guessing intelligence. I'm terrified, I corrected, wrapping the towel around myself. Terror and intelligence aren't mutually exclusive. He offered me a water bottle. Cold, condensation beating on the glass. Your mother enjoys the new art therapy program at her facility. Nicholas arranged additional funding for specialized programs. The staff says she's more engaged than she's been in months. The mention of my mother landed like a punch. I don't need updates on her condition in exchange for compliance. Isn't that what you want, though? To know she's cared for? Franco's tone wasn't cruel, just practical. We're not monsters, Ms. Foster. We're simply people managing complications. He left after that, leaving me alone with the realization that Nicholas had done his research so thoroughly, he understood the exact leverage points in my psychology. He wasn't being cruel. That was almost worse. Cruelty would have been easier to resist. By day 5, I'd established a rhythm. Morning coffee with Sophia, who gradually became less a jailer and more a presence in a life I was learning to tolerate. She told me about her family in Sicily, about grandchildren she saw twice a year, about how she'd worked for various, important men, because that's what Italian women of her generation did. They worked for important men and didn't ask questions. The implication was clear. I could do the same, or I could struggle uselessly. The library became my second sanctuary. I'd discovered Nicholas's collection wasn't merely aesthetic. His books were used. Passages were marked. Margins contained handwritten observations in precise Italian script. I found a volume of Pasolini's poetry and recognized the same passages he'd annotated. The overlap was unsettling. This criminal I was imprisoned by, and I had read the same words, thought similar thoughts about power and mortality, and the corruption of beautiful things. I started writing letters I never intended to send. The line clicked twice, the way it does when someone is measuring your voice by its decibels. Then my mother's breath, small and papery, and immediately home. "Pumpkin," she said, and I closed my eyes at a name that didn't belong to any adult woman I had managed to become. "It's me," I said. "You sound good today." "I painted a lemon," she announced solemnly. "The teacher says I gave it a shadow." "Do lemons have shadows?" "Everything does, if the light is honest." I swallowed the apology that wanted to climb out of my throat. "Do you remember the postcard from Porto?" A pause. Papers shuffling. In my head, the beige common room, the quiet waltz of shoes and wheelchairs. "Sun on water," she said finally. "Your grandmother's handwriting. She said you were made of light." I bit my lip until I tasted iron. She was always dramatic. "Like you," my mother said. And then the clarity dimmed. Her voice wandered into little hallways. "Are you coming by after work?" "Soon." I lied in the tense that people use when time is a weather system. "I'm safe, Mom." "That's a good thing to be," she said, and the nurse must have made some gentle motion because my mother added, obedient as a child, "I have to go to group now." We said goodbye. The recorded light at the end of the call died with an efficient click. I held the phone for a long time afterward. It was the first time since the night at my apartment that I permitted crying as an activity, not because I was weak, because grief had ribs, and some days they pressed. To Derek, explaining why I'd disappeared without warning. To Nancy, telling her stories about my childhood that she'd forgotten, anchoring her in moments she'd lost. To myself, trying to process how someone could kidnap you with genuine concern for your safety. The letter to Nicholas I never started. On day 6, everything changed. Marco appeared at the library door in the early evening with an expression I'd learned meant urgency. He didn't speak to me, just gestured for me to follow. I assumed I was being moved again, relocated to another property, or perhaps my confinement was ending with a different kind of finality. Instead, I found Nicholas in his office, a space I hadn't known existed until that moment. He was on the phone speaking rapid Italian, his knuckles white where he gripped the desk edge. His suit jacket was discarded. His shirt was partially unbuttoned. He looked like someone I'd never seen before. Unraveled. "Enzo?" he was saying, his voice carrying an edge that suggested violence might follow this phone call. "How serious?" "No. Call me the moment." He saw me and cut the conversation short, hanging up without goodbye. For a moment, we simply existed in the same space. Him behind the desk looking like his world was collapsing. Me in the doorway, unsure if I should retreat. "Your uncle?" I asked quietly. "Infarto. They're saying minor, but..." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. He raised me. "My father died when I was 8. Enzo taught me everything. If he didn't finish the sentence. The vulnerability of it was staggering. This man who'd orchestrated my kidnapping, who commanded organizations and controlled territories, was afraid of losing someone he loved. I moved into the room without permission. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk without being invited. The silence stretched between us, heavy with things neither of us could say. "He won't die," I heard myself offer. "Minor infarto means he survived the worst part. That's significant. You don't know that." "No," I agreed. "But I watched my father's health decline for years. I know what it looks like when someone is actually leaving. And I know what it looks like when they're fighting to stay. There's a difference." Nicholas looked at me then. Really looked at me, like I'd suddenly become visible to him in a way I hadn't been before. "Why are you comforting me? Because your uncle raised you. Because you love him. Because..." I paused, searching for honesty. "Because you're human. Because that matters." He stood and moved toward the fireplace, not looking at me. The room was growing dark outside the windows. Lights were coming on across the property, casting everything in geometric patterns of brightness and shadow. "I have nightmares," he said quietly. "About failing. About the organization collapsing because I made one wrong decision. About people I'm responsible for dying because I was weak. That's not weakness. That's conscience. Conscience is a luxury I can't afford." "Maybe," I offered. "But you have it anyway." He didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched until it became almost comfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stripped of the layers of authority and control. "Enzo's in the hospital in Detroit. They're running more tests. Franco will know more by morning." He glanced back at me. "I should tell you to leave, to return to your room. This isn't... You shouldn't see me like this." Franco brought tea and a ledger, and the look of a man who has kept other men alive by getting the decimals right. "You think I don't like you," he said, easing into the chair by the window. Detroit's night pressed a palm to the glass. "I don't. Liking is a liability at my age, but I respect that you haven't asked for an exit with fireworks." "I almost did," I said. "Almost is what keeps people breathing." He opened the ledger, which was not numbers tonight, but a list of names. "We keep a column," he said. "For costs we accept, not money, noise, attention. The kind of attention that invites federal questions or Tanaka's disappointment. You're expensive, but the return is unexpected. I'm not an investment, I said. Everyone is, he said, not unkind. It's just that with you, the dividend might be a smaller perimeter. Fewer bullets. Men who stop needing to prove they are wolves. He closed the ledger and stood. You don't have to like that, he added. You just have to know it. It should have repulsed me. It didn't. It made me want to take a picture of the ledger and write in the margins. Humanity in the black. Finally. Why not? Because it complicates things. What things? He turned to face me fully then, and I realized he was genuinely struggling with the answer. The things that keep me from making you disappear. The things that make you more than leverage. I stayed in that office with him until well into the night. We didn't talk anymore after that. We simply existed in the space together. Him watching his phone for updates about Enzo, me pretending to read a book I'd pulled from his shelf, both of us aware that something fundamental had shifted between captor and captive. By the next morning, Enzo was stable. The infarto had been minor. He would recover. And somewhere in the relief of that news, I understood that I was no longer simply imprisoned. I was connected now to this man's world in ways that transcended my own agency. His vulnerabilities had become mine. His fears had become comprehensible to me. I was still trapped, but I was beginning to wonder if I was only trapped by the walls, or if the trap had somehow become internal. I learned the perimeter in the language Marco trusted. Distances. Not metaphors, not reassurances. Numbers. He handed me a laminated card like a hotel key that opened nothing except a map of where I could stand without triggering protocols. The red squares were no-linger zones. The blue paths were permissible routes. The green dots were places where a camera angle left a blind seam for 20 seconds. Tiny, almost artistic margins of privacy if I needed to breathe without a lens. You won't use the green dots, he said. But knowing they exist is part of the math. Panic is what kills people. Panic, and pretending you don't live inside an equation. He pointed to the tree line. There's a 70-second delay from the first motion ping to boots reaching that stone path. If an unknown crosses the lawn, you move to the library. Not the kitchen, not the pool. Library. Doors there seal in 3 seconds. We can lose a kitchen. We don't lose you. I don't like being part of your inventory, I said. You aren't. His tone was flat but not cruel. You're the variable that breaks the model if we're sloppy. The yard smelled like damp earth and cedar. Far off, the lake kept its own counsel. I held the card until it warmed to my palm and then slid it into the pocket of the black jacket Sophia had found in my size. What happens if I run? I asked. Marco didn't sigh. Men like him don't waste breath that way. Then you trust fear more than you trust timelines. Fear has worse aim. I looked back at the glass house that wasn't a home and had started to pretend it could be. And you? What do you trust? That Mr. Verciani doesn't make sentimental mistakes, he said. After a beat, softer, not twice. I filed the wrong tenderness of that into the folder where I kept words that would matter later. Then I walked the blue path once, then again, until the math of surviving felt less like surrender and more like competence. That night, when I traced the card with my index finger in the dark, I realized competence was sometimes the only dignity captivity offered. I took it anyway. The days following Enzo's stabilization blurred into something resembling normalcy. Nicholas returned to the property with his shoulders slightly less weighted down by dread, though tension remained etched into the corners of his mouth. He didn't seek me out immediately, but his presence became more pronounced around the house. I'd catch glimpses of him in the library late at night, reading in the same chair where I'd watched him fall apart. Different versions of the same man existed in different rooms. On day 9, Franco informed me that the restrictions on my movement were being amended. I could access the entire house without escort. The pool remained monitored by security cameras, which he explained with apologetic precision, but I could swim whenever I wished. The gardens were accessible during daylight hours, though a guard would maintain visual distance. It wasn't freedom. It was a carefully calibrated expansion of my cage. Why? I asked him as he outlined these new parameters in the morning room where Sophia served coffee. Because Mr. Verciani believes you're not a flight risk. Franco said it like reading from a prepared statement. He also believes you're suffering unnecessarily under constant observation. What Franco didn't say was that something had changed in how Nicholas viewed me after that night in his office. The vulnerability he'd revealed had created a debt between us that neither of us quite understood. Or perhaps it had simply made me human to him in ways I hadn't been before. I tested the boundaries carefully. The gardens were expansive. Manicured lawns giving way to natural forest, stone pathways winding through carefully planted trees that somehow managed to feel both designed and authentic. I walked them daily, always aware of the man maintaining distance behind me. Never threatening, just present. The library became my real sanctuary after that. I could spend hours there without surveillance beyond the cameras. Nicholas had clearly been accumulating books for decades, and the collection told stories about him that his carefully maintained exterior never would. Philosophy, poetry, economic theory, crime novels written by authors who romanticized a life he lived without romance. On day 10, I discovered the annotations. I'd been browsing the Italian section, pulling volumes at random, when I found his handwriting. Passages marked in Pasolini's work, in the margins of which Nicholas had written observations in precise Italian script. The same passages I'd underlined in a worn copy I found on another shelf. We'd been reading the same words, circling the same ideas about power and corruption, and the way beautiful things could be ruined by people who loved them. It was such a mundane overlap, two people drawn to the same literature, but it unsettled me. This man who'd orchestrated my kidnapping, and I had thought in parallel lines about Pasolini's vision of a dying world. That evening, I found Nicholas in the study I'd discovered. He was working through documents. The jacket of his suit discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He didn't look up immediately when I entered. "We read the same books," I said. He set down his pen. "We do. How?" "Coincidence. Shared aesthetics. The fact that people drawn to organized crime are often drawn to literature that explores corruption and collapse." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit, if you'd like." We didn't discuss the books that night. Instead, he talked about Enzo's recovery, about the organization's movements, about the delicate balance required to maintain power across multiple jurisdictions. Conversations that should have terrified me instead fascinated me. He was trying to explain himself without explicitly doing so, offering context for decisions that had shaped my captivity. The physical distance between us closed incrementally. By day 12, he'd begun appearing in the library where I spent my afternoons reading. He'd settle into the opposing chair, work through correspondence on his laptop, occasionally ask my opinion on a passage I was reading. The proximity was intoxicating for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. That night, I'd fallen asleep reading. I woke to discover he'd moved me from the uncomfortable library chair to my bedroom. He hadn't touched me inappropriately. I'd simply been repositioned with careful efficiency, covered with a blanket. The violation should have angered me. Instead, I felt something far more dangerous. Trust. "Why did you do that?" I asked him the next morning. "Because you were sleeping in an impossible position. Your neck would have been in pain." He said it like this was obvious. Like anyone would have done the same. And because leaving you there felt like a cruelty I wasn't willing to commit. The conversations deepened. He asked me about my childhood. About why I'd chosen photography as a profession. About what I'd wanted from life before his people arrived at my apartment. I answered honestly, which meant revealing vulnerabilities that should have remained buried. I told him about my father's death, about my mother's slow dissolution into Alzheimer's, about the photography work that had started as documentation of beauty and evolved into investigation of corruption. He listened without interruption, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried weight that suggested understanding rather than judgment. "We're not so different," he said quietly, "both trying to expose truth, both understanding that truth is dangerous. I expose truth to punish corruption. You perpetuate it." Yes. He didn't argue the point, but perhaps that's simply where our moral frameworks diverged. I was born into this. You chose investigation. Neither of us had the luxury of remaining unaware. Day 14 arrived with the same steady routine I'd fallen into. Morning coffee, library time, afternoon walk through gardens. evening meal with Sofia, who'd begun teaching me simple Italian phrases like I was staying here permanently, like this might actually become my life. Then Marco appeared in the library doorway, with an expression I'd learned to read as something between alert and dangerous. Nicholas looked up from the documents he was reviewing, and the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. "We have a problem," Marco said in Italian, though slowly enough that I could follow. "Tanaka's people. They've found the perimeter." Nicholas's jaw tightened. He stood with fluid precision, already moving toward the door. "How long?" "Hours, maybe less. They're still positioning, but surveillance confirmed at least 4 operatives. They know someone's here." The implication was clear. The Yakuza had located the property. The safety I'd been constructing in my mind, brick by brick, had just collapsed entirely. Nicholas turned to me, and for a moment I saw all the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was measuring options, weighing consequences, deciding how to protect something he'd begun to regard as valuable. "Start the evacuation protocol," he instructed Marco. Then to me, "You have 1 hour to pack essentials. We're leaving." I stood, my legs unsteady. "Leaving where?" "Somewhere they can't follow," he said. "But we need to move now. The security of this place, this strange gilded prison where I'd somehow become attached to my captor, was evaporating." And as Marco left to coordinate the departure, Nicholas looked at me with an expression that suggested he understood exactly what I was losing, because he was losing it too. Whatever strange connection had formed between us over these 2 weeks was about to be tested by chaos and violence and the unforgiving mathematics of organized crime. Marco drove with the kind of controlled aggression that suggested years of experience transporting people who couldn't afford to be found. I sat in the back seat watching Michigan dissolve behind us, the property I'd somehow begun to think of as sanctuary, disappearing into forest and darkness. 3 hours to Detroit, he'd said. 3 hours to process that safety had always been an illusion. The evacuation had been executed with military precision. Sofia had appeared at my door within minutes of Nicholas's order, helping me pack essentials into a single duffel bag. She hadn't spoken beyond necessary instructions, but her hands had been gentle as she folded the few clothes I'd accumulated. When I tried to bring books from the library, she'd shaken her head. No unnecessary weight. Nothing that couldn't be abandoned if we needed to run again. Nicholas had disappeared immediately after giving the evacuation order. I'd caught glimpses of him moving through the house with Franco, coordinating something I wasn't privy to. Security protocols, contingency plans, the machinery of organized crime operating around me, while I remained the thing being protected, the asset being relocated. The highway stretched empty ahead of us. Marco drove without music, without conversation. In the rearview mirror, I could see his eyes constantly scanning the road behind us, checking for vehicles that maintained too consistent a distance. I wondered what he'd do if the Yakuza appeared, whether he'd fight or simply drive faster, whether my survival was worth dying for in his calculations. "How did they find the property?" I asked, breaking the silence that had stretched for almost an hour. Marco's eyes flicked to the mirror. "Patterns. Mr. Verciani has owned that house for 8 years. Someone with enough resources and patience can map movements, trace utility payments, identify properties associated with shell companies. The Yakuza are patient. And this new location? Unknown to them. Acquired recently through intermediaries they haven't connected to the organization yet." He changed lanes smoothly, passing a semi-truck. "But nothing stays secret forever. We buy time, not safety." The honesty was startling. I'd expected reassurance, lies designed to keep me compliant. Instead, Marco was simply stating mathematics. Every safe house had a half-life. Eventually, radiation leaked through the walls. Detroit emerged from the darkness like a constellation of failing lights. We entered through industrial areas, past warehouses with broken windows and chain-link fences crowned with razor wire. This wasn't the Detroit of revitalization projects and architectural landmarks. This was the Detroit that people preferred to forget existed, where buildings crumbled slowly, and nobody asked questions about who came and went. The new location was an apartment above what appeared to be a legitimate business, some kind of import-export company with signage in 3 languages. Marco pulled into an underground garage, waited for the security door to close behind us before killing the engine. The sudden silence was oppressive. 4th floor, he said, handing me a keycard. You'll wait there until Mr. Verciani arrives. When will that be? When he's certain we weren't followed. Marco opened his door, already moving with purpose. Could be hours. The apartment was smaller than the Michigan property by orders of magnitude. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living space that functioned as kitchen and sitting area simultaneously. Windows overlooked the street below, but heavy curtains were already drawn. Security cameras were visible in 3 corners. No pretense of privacy this time. Just surveillance and the understanding that I was cargo being stored until needed. I sat on the generic gray couch and waited. The city sounds filtered up from below. Sirens in the distance, occasional voices, the mechanical hum of the building's heating system. Different from Michigan's organic quiet, here, I was surrounded by humanity while feeling more isolated than I'd felt in the forest property. Hours passed. I found instant coffee in the kitchenette, made a cup that tasted like cardboard and petroleum. Drank it anyway. Tried to read the paperback someone had left on the coffee table, but couldn't focus beyond the first paragraph. My mind kept circling back to Nicholas's expression when Marco had delivered the news about the Yakuza. That momentary calculation where he'd weighed options and found them all inadequate. When he finally arrived, it was past midnight. I heard the keycard in the lock, then voices in the hallway. Nicholas speaking to Franco in clipped Italian. The door opened, and I understood immediately that something had gone badly. Nicholas's shirt was torn at the shoulder. Blood had dried in a dark stain across his left side. His face carried fresh bruising along the jaw, and his knuckles were raw like he'd used them against something harder than flesh. Behind him, Franco looked equally disheveled, though less injured. They'd fought someone, maybe multiple someones. You're hurt, I said, standing. Contained, Nicholas replied, moving past me toward the bathroom. Franco, briefer on tomorrow's arrangements. He closed the bathroom door before I could protest. I heard water running, heard the quiet sounds of someone cleaning wounds they couldn't reach properly. When I moved toward the door, Franco intercepted me gently. Let him have privacy, Franco said quietly. His pride is injured worse than his body. What happened? The Yakuza operatives who'd found the Michigan property. Mr. Verciani handled the complication personally. Franco's tone suggested volumes about what handled meant. The situation is now contained, but it accelerated our timeline. I sank back onto the couch, processing. Nicholas had killed people tonight, or ordered their deaths, or participated in violence that ended with him covered in someone else's blood. The man who'd carried me to bed when I'd fallen asleep reading had spent the evening engaged in brutality I couldn't quite conceptualize. The photographs, Franco continued, pulling a chair across from me. They're being destroyed tomorrow, a neutral location. Representatives from both organizations will be present. You'll witness the destruction. Why do I need to be there? Because the Yakuza needs to believe you're cooperating voluntarily. If they suspect coercion, they'll assume the photographs still exist elsewhere. Your presence, your visible compliance, sells the fiction that this is agreed upon by all parties. And after they're destroyed, you remain with Mr. Verciani for 48 hours while the Yakuza confirms no copies exist. Then theoretically, you're free. Franco's expression suggested he understood how hollow theoretically sounded. But that's a conversation for another time. Nicholas emerged from the bathroom wearing a clean shirt Franco must have brought. The blood was gone, but exhaustion had settled into the lines around his eyes. He'd aged a decade in the hours since I'd last seen him. You should sleep, he said, not quite meeting my gaze. Tomorrow will be demanding. Before tomorrow, I said. I want terms. Nicholas was halfway to the window, the old instinct that makes men check glass before they check themselves. He turned back. I hated that the look on his face was not annoyance, but attention. Not leverage, I added. Language. Say it, he said. I won't be punished for common sense, I said. If I choose a door during a fire drill you didn't choreograph, you don't call it disobedience. You call it survival. My throat tightened, but I held the note. And I don't vanish. From your men. From myself. From the parts of me that write and take pictures and call my mother on days that are bad. If I stay, those parts stay with me. Nicholas's jaw moved once. a tiny mechanical concession. What do you give me in return? The obvious, I said. No police, no journalists, no improvisations that make your men die because my feelings were louder than your math. And I tell you when my fear wants to do something stupid, so your math can be louder. Somewhere in that, his shoulders lowered by a degree, math would not register. Done, he said. Say it like a contract, I said, because words are the only paper some men respect. He did. He said it in Italian, then again in English, careful with each consonant like each was a trigger. I repeated it back. The window at his back doubled us. In the reflection, we looked like an approximation of something civilized. It wasn't. It was better. A truce neither of us had been taught how to want. Are you all right? Functional. He finally looked at me directly. The men tonight, they weren't supposed to engage. They were surveillance only. When they realized we were evacuating, they attempted to capture you directly, force our hand. And they failed. The finality in his voice left no room for further questions. You're safe. That's what matters. But safety felt increasingly relative. I was safe from the Yakuza only because Nicholas had committed violence on my behalf. I was safe from federal prosecution only because he'd hidden evidence. I was safe from abandonment only because I'd become something more than leverage to him. Every form of safety I possessed was conditional, negotiated, temporary. I don't know how to feel about any of this, I admitted. Neither do I. His honesty surprised me. You should have remained a problem to solve. You became complicated instead. We stood there in the small apartment, two people caught in circumstances neither had chosen, connected by violence and necessity, and something neither of us wanted to name. Tomorrow I would help destroy the work that had defined my investigation. Tomorrow I would participate in theater, designed to convince murderers that I was compliant. Tomorrow, the fragile routine we'd built in Michigan would be replaced by uncertainty. Tonight, I simply watched Nicholas move to the window and check the street below, his body still coiled with tension from whatever he'd done to keep me breathing. The man who'd kidnapped me. The man who'd saved me. The man I was beginning to realize I couldn't separate from anymore, no matter how much psychological distance I tried to maintain. Franco left us alone after that, promising to return at dawn with appropriate clothing for tomorrow's meeting. When he was gone, Nicholas and I existed in silence, punctuated only by the city's ambient noise. He didn't approach me. I didn't retreat. We simply occupied the same space, waiting for a morning that would change everything or change nothing, depending on whether the Yakuza believed the performance we were about to stage. Franco arrived before dawn with clothing that transformed me into someone playing a role rather than living a life. Black tailored dress, professional blazer, heels that clicked against concrete with authority I didn't possess. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back looked composed, controlled, capable of witnessing the destruction of her own investigation without falling apart. You need to appear cooperative, Franco explained, adjusting my collar with practiced precision. Not grateful, not traumatized, professional, someone who understands the business being conducted. Nicholas watched from the corner of the room without speaking. He'd slept in the chair beside my bed, his presence a constant weight that should have comforted me, but instead intensified the claustrophobia of knowing I was about to perform theater designed by criminals for an audience of worse criminals. The warehouse location was provided only minutes before departure. Some neutral ground that neither organization controlled, chosen through negotiations I wasn't privy to. Marco drove while Franco briefed me on protocols. I would stand beside Nicholas. I would not speak unless directly addressed. I would watch the photographs be destroyed and offer no visible reaction. My presence alone would communicate what mattered. Voluntary cooperation. What if I refuse? I asked as the city blurred past. Then you've already decided you'd rather die than be saved, Franco replied without judgment. Because that's what refusing means now. The warehouse was industrial anonymity. Red brick exterior that could have been anywhere in America. No signage, no indication of purpose. Nicholas's people had arrived first. I counted 6 of them positioned at entry points and interior corners. They were mercenaries disguised as bodyguards, their movements suggesting they'd killed people, and would do so again without hesitation. Then the Yakuza arrived. 4 vehicles, 8 men in suits that fit too precisely, and 1 man who commanded the space simply by occupying it. Kenji Tanaka. I recognized him from the photographs I'd taken. In person, he was smaller than his reputation suggested. But the way everyone oriented around him revealed the actual architecture of power. Mr. Versiani, Tanaka greeted Nicholas in English, touched by a Japanese accent. Thank you for accommodating this meeting. Miss Foster was an unfortunate complication for both organizations, Nicholas replied, his own accent becoming more pronounced, a marker of his Italian heritage emerging under pressure. I'm suggesting we resolve it together. Tanaka's eyes found me. I felt his assessment like physical weight, his mind cataloging whether I was threat or tool, or something that could be discarded. The woman who saw everything, the woman who will now see the destruction of everything. Franco corrected smoothly. The photographs that created this situation will be permanently removed. They'd brought a technical specialist, someone who worked with computers like they contained answers to existential questions. He set up equipment in the center of the warehouse while both organizations maintained distance like predators establishing territory. The photographs appeared on a monitor suspended from portable stands. Images I'd captured. Images that had defined the last 2 weeks of my existence, displayed for judgment, by men who would never be judged themselves. Everything from the SD card, the specialist announced. Full backup recovery attempted. Nothing exists beyond these images. Tanaka nodded to one of his subordinates, who handed him a device. The destruction should be witnessed by both parties. Complete deletion. What followed was choreography executed with precision. Files were selected. Permanent deletion protocols initiated. Progress bars filled toward finality. My investigation vanishing into code and mathematics, and the absolute erasure of evidence. Each photograph I'd risked everything to capture, each moment I'd documented, reduced to null values and empty sectors on a hard drive that was then physically destroyed. They brought a hammer. The specialist's hands shook as he smashed the hard drive into fragments. Tanaka watched with the expression of someone closing a book they'd already read. When the last piece had been destroyed, he turned to Nicholas. The girl walks free after 48 hours of verification, Tanaka said. If she's found speaking to authorities, the agreement becomes void. Understood, Nicholas replied, and Versiani. Tanaka stepped closer to Nicholas. If she attempts to reconstruct those images through any backup or recovery method, I personally ensure both you and she experience consequences that make this entire situation seem merciful. She understands the parameters. Tanaka glanced at me. Do you, Ms. Foster, do you understand that your freedom is conditional on absolute silence? That speaking to journalists, police, or federal agencies means immediate execution? That the only path to continued breathing is complete erasure of this entire situation from your mind? I wanted to resist. I wanted to rage about agency and autonomy, and the fundamental wrongness of being bartered between organizations that destroyed lives for profit. Instead, I nodded. Yes, I said quietly. The meeting concluded with handshakes that looked more like contract negotiations than human interaction. Both organizations withdrew slowly, maintaining distance like animals establishing neutral territory. By the time we reached the car, the warehouse was being sanitized, people erasing evidence that either organization had ever been present. They were careful about it, which is how I knew it was real. No sirens, no press. A woman in a navy suit who didn't introduce herself as anything, and didn't need to. She waited by the service entrance of the warehouse while Tanaka's convoy dissolved like a disciplined tide. Her hair was neat in the way of people who sleep 3 hours and pretend it's a choice. When Franco saw her first, he only said, 5 minutes, to Nicholas. Nicholas said nothing, which I understood as permission that could be revoked by a single verb. I'm not here to burn you, the woman said to me, not glancing at the men who were not statues. You are not in custody. I'm not in the business of martyring photographers. A small line appeared between her brows, or women with mothers in memory care. The information sat heavy in the air like a file set gently on a table. She wasn't flexing. She was proving she could have, and chose not to. What do you want? I asked. Absence, she said. Of you. From this case. From our reports. From the places where a spreadsheet might teach someone your name by accident. Your friend Mitchell is smart enough not to print you. He'll stay that way. She let that hang, then added, I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to believe I prefer some truths without corpses. She gave me a card with nothing on it. Blank ivory. Show this at the airport, she said. And then to Nicholas without meeting his eyes. Don't make me chase her. We won't, Nicholas said. The woman left like math leaving a room, quietly, with the dignity of numbers that don't need applause. It was the only time the FBI felt like a wall and not a blade. During the drive back to the Detroit apartment, nobody spoke. Franco remained in the front seat, while Nicholas and I occupied the back in perfect silence. I kept seeing the photographs being destroyed. Not with sadness, I'd already grieved them, but with a strange sense of completion. That chapter had ended. A different one was opening, though I couldn't yet see its margins. Back at the apartment, Franco delivered documents while Nicholas showered away the physical residue of the meeting. A new passport identifying me as Olivia Wells, born in Boston. $30,000 in cash arranged in neat bundles. A plane ticket to London dated for 24 hours later. Everything required to become someone else. These are your exit requirements, Franco explained, laying everything on the coffee table like evidence for a crime I was about to commit. You'll have a secure departure window. Nobody will interfere with your departure. You disappear into the world, start fresh, never mention any of this. And if I don't use them? Then you stay with Mr. Versiani indefinitely. You remain in this life. Franco's tone suggested he already knew which option terrified me more, though that complicates things significantly. The Yakuza would assume your leverage he's keeping, which would make you both targets. He left me alone with the documents and the mathematics of survival. Freedom was technically available. I could leave tomorrow, become Olivia Wells, disappear into whatever life existed for people with fake identities and blood on their hands through association. Nicholas emerged from the shower wearing simple clothes, jeans and a gray shirt. He saw the documents, saw the plane ticket to London, saw everything I'd been offered. His expression betrayed nothing. But I understood what the absence of expression meant. He'd prepared this exit, knowing I might use it. Knowing I should use it. You should go, he said quietly. Should? Would be logical. Would be safe. Would be merciful to yourself. He sat across from me, leaving distance between us that felt like an ocean. You have freedom now. The photographs are destroyed. The Yakuza has agreed not to hunt you. You could actually become Olivia Wells and live a life untethered from organized crime. Could I? Yes. I looked at the ticket. London was real. The life it promised was quantifiable. I could walk away from this man, from his world, from the complicated feelings that had developed in the forced intimacy of confinement. I could be free. I don't want to, I heard myself say. Nicholas's entire body went still. Olivia, I know I should. I know it's insane. But I can't look at you and pretend that the past 2 weeks meant nothing. I can't pretend I don't understand you. That I haven't seen you vulnerable and terrified and human beneath the authority and the violence. Understanding me is dangerous. I'm already dangerous to you. I'm already compromised. And you're already... I paused, searching for words that could contain what I felt. You're already everything I can't leave behind anymore. He moved toward me then, closing the distance I'd been maintaining. His hand found my face with unexpected tenderness. This life will destroy you eventually. Maybe. But at least I'll be destroyed with someone who kept me breathing. I met his gaze directly. That has to count for something. The kiss happened without planning. It was less passion than inevitability. Two people who'd been circling each other for weeks, finally acknowledging that resistance was exhaustion neither could afford. When we finally separated, I still held the plane ticket, but it had become just paper instead of possibility. 48 hours until the Yakuza completes their verification, Nicholas said. After that, you'll be officially safe with me. I set the ticket on the table beside the passport and the money. Choices I was refusing to make because I'd already made the more important one. Then we have 48 hours to figure out what happens next. The morning light filtering through the apartment windows felt like a countdown. 48 hours had passed. The Yakuza's verification was complete. I was officially safe. I held the London plane ticket between my fingers, watching sunlight transform the paper into something ephemeral, something that might dissolve if I looked away too long. Nicholas slept in the bedroom, exhaustion finally claiming him after days of orchestrating logistics, negotiating terms, ensuring my safety existed in measurable forms. I'd woken early with the clarity that comes only when facing impossible decisions. The ticket represented freedom. The apartment represented captivity dressed as choice. Both options were equally terrifying. Franco had left updated documents on the kitchen counter. New passport, fresh currency, instructions for international wire transfers that would ensure financial independence. Everything meticulously prepared for my departure. Everything designed to facilitate my disappearance from this life. From Nicholas. From myself, perhaps. I packed methodically, separating what belonged to my old identity from what I'd accumulated in this strange new existence. The red jacket, several books from his collection that I'd borrowed and never returned. Photographs Sophia had given me, candid shots of the Michigan property, moments I hadn't realized she was documenting. I placed them all in the duffel bag that had carried me from Chicago to Michigan to Detroit, the bag of transitions. By 9 a.m, I'd arranged everything. Called a car service, confirmed the flight, written a letter to Nicholas that I couldn't bring myself to finish, let alone leave. The words felt insufficient against what he'd offered, what he'd risked, what we'd constructed together in those weeks. Marco arrived to drive me without being asked. He seemed to understand that this was protocol, that Nicholas had probably instructed him to facilitate my departure regardless of his own preferences. We didn't speak during the journey to the airport. The city passed in blurs of architecture and ordinary life. People walking to jobs, catching buses, living existences untethered from criminal organizations and impossible choices. Inside Detroit Metropolitan, I moved through the terminal like an actor inhabiting someone else's narrative. Olivia Wells, born in Boston, traveling to London for professional development. The passport was excellent. The story was plausible. Nothing about me suggested I was abandoning the only person who'd ever seen me completely. Security line, carry-on inspection, all normal procedures for normal people making normal flights. I followed the flow of travelers toward the gate area, pulled toward my seat assignment and my new life, with the momentum of inevitability. But at the gate, sitting among families and business travelers and students embarking on semester abroad programs, I opened the duffel bag to retrieve my phone for flight mode. That's when I found it. A mochila within the bag, sealed in clear plastic. Inside were things that shouldn't have traveled with me. Things I'd never packed. My diaries from the Chicago apartment. All 3 of them. 3 years of my private thoughts, locked away in Nicholas's safe while I remained imprisoned. But he'd kept them, and now they were here. Underneath the diaries lay photographs. My father as a young man, holding my mother before I was born. Me at 7 years old building sandcastles on a beach I'd forgotten I'd ever visited. My grandparents at their wedding, both long dead, both preserved in emulsion and paper, memories I'd thought were lost forever. And beneath those, a postcard, the exact postcard my grandmother had sent me when I was 12, a beach scene from Porto, Portugal. On the back, her handwriting in English, "For our Olivia, who captures light so beautifully. Come see the world, Grandma." My hands began shaking. These were artifacts of myself that had no place in a criminal's safe house. These were intimate pieces that shouldn't have been preserved, analyzed, studied by someone orchestrating my kidnapping. Yet, here they were. Nicholas had kept them. He'd protected them. He'd curated them like treasures. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. First-class passengers were invited to board. I stood without conscious decision, moving toward the gate with my boarding pass extended. The flight attendant scanned it. She smiled. She gestured me forward. I couldn't move. My body had separated from my will. Around me, travelers flowed toward the jetway. The attendant looked up questioningly. "I'm sorry," I heard myself say. "I need to reschedule." The logistics of canceling a flight were surprisingly simple. The airline processed the refund. The gate agent issued a new ticket valid for future travel. I walked back through the terminal carrying luggage I'd repacked, and a decision I couldn't fully articulate. Franco was still waiting in the arrivals area, checking his phone with the patience of someone who'd anticipated exactly this outcome. When he saw me emerge from the security area, he didn't smile or offer congratulations. He simply nodded and gestured toward the parking structure. "Mr. Versiani will be pleased," he said as I climbed into the car. "Don't tell him. Not yet." The drive back to Detroit was quieter than the drive to the airport. I held the mochila in my lap, understanding that its contents represented something I couldn't quantify or rationalize. Nicholas had violated my privacy completely. He'd preserved pieces of my soul without permission. He'd demonstrated the absolute depth of his obsession with understanding me. It should have terrified me. Instead, I felt seen in ways I'd never experienced before. The apartment was silent when we arrived. Franco left without comment, discretion his specialty. I found Nicholas in the bedroom, awake now, watching the window with the expression of someone counting down hours until a departure they'd already accepted. "The flight," he said without looking at me. I came back. His entire body went still. Vertebra by vertebra, his spine straightened. He turned to face me completely. "Why?" I opened the mochila. Showed him the diaries, the photographs, the postcard. "Because you kept these. Because you preserved pieces of me that I'd thought were destroyed. Because violating my privacy so completely somehow became the most honest thing anyone's ever done. Olivia, I'm not staying because I'm trapped," I continued. "I'm not staying because I lack alternatives. I'm staying because you've already seen everything I am, and you haven't destroyed it. You've protected it. That's terrifying and impossible and completely insane. But it's also the only thing that matters." He moved toward me like crossing an ocean. His hands found my face with that same careful tenderness he'd shown only in private moments. "If you stay, things will be complicated. They already are. You could die. I could have died in Chicago. At least here I'll have died understood." I met his gaze directly. "I'm staying because staying with you is the only choice that feels honest anymore." His kiss held all the words neither of us could speak. When we separated, something fundamental had shifted. Not resolution, but acceptance. A recognition that some prisons are indistinguishable from sanctuaries, that love might exist in the margins between confinement and liberation. "We need new arrangements," I said quietly. "I won't be kept. I won't be monitored constantly. I need space and autonomy and the ability to make my own decisions, within parameters for safety. Within parameters we negotiate together." I set the mochila down. "I'm choosing this, but the choice only matters if it's truly mine." He nodded slowly, understanding that everything had changed between us. Not romantically simplified into resolution, but transformed into something more genuine. A partnership forged in violence and desperation, and the strange alchemy of two people who'd started as captor and prisoner and become something neither of us had names for anymore. 3 months after I returned to Detroit, we moved back to Michigan. Not to the same property. Nicholas had sold that years ago, apparently, kept it only for business purposes. Instead, we acquired a different house 2 hours north, closer to Grayling. This one was smaller, less architectural statement, more actual home. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the lake, but the design felt lived in rather than curated. Sophia came with us. Sophia decided that the kitchen would be the only room where certain nouns were forbidden. Yakuza, bureau, blood. The words could live in the study, the library, the car, the woods. Not where dough rose and coffee forgave. She rapped my knuckles with a wooden spoon the first time I said surveillance, while zesting a lemon. "Basta," she said. "Here, we say zest. We say simmer. We say taste and see." "And what does Nicholas say?" I asked. "That he will try," she said. And it was the softest indictment I had ever heard. We braided bread, and she taught me the trick for not being too rough with dough that looks like it wants punishment. When Nicholas came in later and kissed my neck in a way that would have made teenage me leave the room, Sophia made a face like a mother who permits happiness in supervised doses. "Eat," she commanded him, sliding a bowl across the counter. And don't talk like men with teeth. He obeyed. In the kitchen, even wolves can be polite. She'd somehow transitioned from housekeeping to something closer to family, offering her particular brand of gentle Italian directness. She taught me recipes her grandmother had taught her. She observed Nicholas and me with the knowing expression of someone who'd seen similar arrangements before and understood that judgment was irrelevant. Derek arrived on a Tuesday in late June. "You vanished," he said, and the first laugh we shared was about the audacity of words. "I adapted," I said. He took that in, the way good reporters respect an answer you didn't exactly give. "Do you love him?" he asked, not cruelly. "I love the math we wrote," I said, "and the man who lets the math be kinder than it used to be." "That sounds like yes," Derek said. "It sounds like survival wearing something nicer than guilt." I squeezed his hand. "Please don't write me." "I wrote around you," he said. "Negative space, Liv. You'd be amazed how much picture lives there." He was right. The best journalism knows the difference between what's true and what needs to be printed. He looked different than I remembered, hardened by 3 months of investigation, of building a career from the ashes of my disappearance. He'd become a crime reporter, following stories that led him directly to the Versiani organization and the Yakuza conflict. When I'd suggested he might be putting himself in danger, Nicholas had simply arranged for his protection. Not imprisonment, just careful oversight. Derek lived freely in Chicago, but he lived with the knowledge that powerful people were watching him. "You look good," Derek said, embracing me with the awkwardness of someone who'd known me before all this. "Happy, even. That's disturbing." "I'm not happy exactly," I corrected. "I'm adapted." He spent the afternoon with Nicholas, an encounter I'd dreaded. But Nicholas treated him with the respect due someone who'd once been my world. They discussed journalism, corruption, the intersection of truth and power. By evening, Derek was asking if he could return occasionally. By the next morning, he'd become something like trusted. My mother visited in early August. She didn't quite understand what had happened during those weeks when I'd disappeared, her Alzheimer's conveniently obscuring the gaps in my narrative. She knew I was with someone. She knew I was safe. She seemed content with that knowledge. We walked the Michigan grounds together, her hand in mine, while Nicholas maintained appropriate distance. When she asked who he was, I simply said, "Someone who loves me." She smiled and said, "I deserved that." The photographs started coming together that autumn. Freelance work that Nicholas's connections facilitated. Weddings, corporate events, magazine assignments. The work that kept me sane, that proved I could exist outside his world even if I existed within it. My portfolio grew. My reputation rebuilt. People hired Olivia Wells without knowing that Olivia Foster had ever existed. Franco appeared monthly with financial reports. The organization was expanding into legitimate enterprises. Nicholas was diversifying, investing in real estate development, art galleries, restaurants. The criminal infrastructure was always there, but now it was balanced with legitimate business that served as both cover and genuine investment. I asked him once why he was changing operational strategy. "Because you're here," he said simply. "Because I want there to be a future that isn't just survival and violence." In October, Enzo's death became real in ways it hadn't been in the abstract. I watched Nicholas grieve privately, saw the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on his shoulders. His uncle had been buffer between Nicholas and the full weight of command. Now there was no buffer. I held him through a night where he didn't speak, where grief rendered him silent and human and terribly vulnerable. By November, the life we were building had developed its own rhythm. The magazine wanted industrial romance, steel and skin, and the idea that a city could be both ruin and runway. I said yes because the brief didn't ask for courage, only light. We shot in a foundry that paid its people and washed its hands. I told the models to look like they remembered their father's hands on their shoulders when the world was noisy. They did. The editor emailed at midnight. We didn't know ghosts could sell denim. I laughed for the first time in a week without sounding like a woman negotiating for breath. I texted the nurse to ask if my mother had painted lemons again. The reply came with a photo and the single word shadows. It felt like permission to keep breathing. On the drive home, Nicholas didn't talk. He didn't have to. He looked at the proofs and said quietly, "You make the broken look honest." He put the phone face down and added, "That's the only beauty I trust." I reached for his hand and didn't let go at the stoplight. Love is sometimes just not letting go at the red. Morning coffee on the terrace. Work in my studio. A converted room that overlooked the lake. Afternoon walks through the property. Evenings where Nicholas addressed business while I photographed or read. Physical intimacy that had become tender and genuine, rather than desperate. Conversations that ranged from philosophy to operational strategy, to the mundane details of someone learning to love within extraordinary circumstances. The negotiated parameters we'd established held firm. Nicholas's men maintained perimeter security, but I could leave the property with notice. My communications were monitored less intrusively now. My autonomy existed within defined boundaries that I'd helped establish. It wasn't perfect freedom, but it was honest trade. Safety and connection, in exchange for accepting that my love was bound to someone who operated in territories most people didn't acknowledge existed. One evening in December, Nicholas found me in the library reading. We'd both gravitated there over the months. It had become our shared space. "Derek called," he said, settling into the chair across from mine. "He's publishing an article about federal corruption related to organized crime. He's being very careful not to implicate anyone specifically, but the implications are clear. Will it cause problems? It'll create noise, attention from authorities. It'll complicate certain operations." He paused. "But it's good journalism. It's truth." I told him to publish it. I set down my book. "Why would you say that?" "Because you taught me that exposing corruption matters. Because Derek matters to you, which means his work matters." Nicholas leaned back, watching me. "Because sometimes the line between the world I inhabit and the world you came from isn't as absolute as we pretend." That night, we lay in bed watching moonlight pattern across the ceiling. I thought about the girl who'd been editing photographs in a Chicago apartment 3 months ago. That version of me would never have recognized this one. That version had believed in clear moral lines. This version understood that moral lines were negotiable. "Do you regret it?" Nicholas asked into the darkness. "Staying with me? Every day," I replied honestly. "And not at all." "That's paradoxical." "Yes." He found my hand in the darkness. "I'll never let you go." "I know. Does that bother you?" "Sometimes," I admitted, "but less than it used to, because I'm not sure I want to be let go anymore." The year ended with snow covering the Michigan landscape. Derek published his article to significant attention. Nancy had a good month cognitively. Sophia made lasagna that tasted like Italy. And I existed in the margin between the woman I'd been and the woman I was becoming. This wasn't redemption. It wasn't resolution. It was simply the ongoing negotiation of two people who'd started as captor and captive and become something more complicated. Nicholas never stopped being dangerous. I never stopped understanding the cost of my choice. But we chose each other anyway, day after day, within parameters we'd established together. As spring approached, I wondered what the next chapter would require, whether the Yakuza peace would hold, whether federal investigations would eventually complicate our arrangement, whether Derek's journalism would create exposure we couldn't navigate. But those were questions for future seasons. For now, I sat beside Nicholas in the library and existed in the impossible space we'd created. Not happy, not free in conventional ways, but present, witnessed, loved by someone who'd literally broken into my life to save it, and who understood that salvation and captivity weren't always distinct concepts. The lake outside the windows reflected moonlight, like mirrored truth. Neither of us had chosen the circumstances that brought us together, but we'd both chosen what came after. And that choice, renewed each morning, had become the only freedom that mattered anymore.